Welcome back to the Halloween movie marathon, and today we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorites. I've been watching this movie over and over and over again for years, and I cannot stop. Today we're talking Evil Dead Part 2.
Swallow your soul! Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn.
And I know a lot of you guys are probably wondering, hey man, what the hell is Part 1? Well, it's very similar to the way I view the Jason franchise. I only reviewed Part 6 because this time around I only want to review movies that I really adore and love. And Part 1 through 5, it would have been a chore to review all of them. And since this time around I want to review different franchises or different entries within franchises, I decided to only review the ones that I personally love most. And I do believe that Evil Dead 2 is the film that turned the Evil Dead franchise into a franchise. It is very different from the original, but I'm not gonna leave you hanging. I'm gonna talk a little bit about Part 1, which is a movie that I'd still recommend, that I still like. But in no way, shape, or form does it come close to the greatness that is Evil Dead Part 2. So the first film dealt with a group of people who all wanted to spend the weekend at a nice getaway at a cabin in the woods. There they stumbled upon the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, also known as the Book of the Dead. And once certain passages were read out loud, it unleashed something in the woods, something evil that started to possess them one by one and murder them in the most gruesome, violent, and gory way possible. The only person that made it out alive was a character known as Ash Lee, played by a very young Bruce Campbell. This movie was a passion project by everyone involved, especially director Sam Raimi and actor Bruce Campbell. And people demanded a sequel. It's really interesting if you look at the behind the scenes story. Sam Raimi wasn't necessarily interested in a sequel, but after the next project bombed, he realized that horror was the way to go, and people were demanding a sequel. Stephen King actually helped finance this film, Part 2. And what Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell did with this sequel is incredible, because turns out it's not actually a sequel. Bruce Campbell described it as a requel, because the first 7 minutes are actually an alternate version of the first film. This time around, it's only Ash and his girlfriend Linda that traveled to the cabin. The rest of the gang, no longer around. They didn't have the rights to their original film, so they reshot it, but also completely changed the character of Ash. They no longer called him Ashley, he was just Ash. And he was no longer this introverted guy. I mean, he was flirty, he was charming. Right out the gate, you're like, that's nothing like the Ash I remember.
What do you say we have some champagne, eh, baby? Huh?
This time around, they find recordings from a certain Professor Noby, play the recordings that recite passages from the Necronomicon, and boom, evil hits the cabin, possesses Linda, Ash has to decapitate her, and from this moment on, it is the Bruce Campbell Ash Williams show. It actually picks up where the first film ends and shows us what happened after the evil went after Ash. And this movie is such a unique entry in the horror genre in general. It's so hard for me to describe it because it has all the creepy atmosphere of your typical cabin in the woods film or of the first film within the franchise. But at the same time, it has all the comedy. And a lot of credits have to go to Bruce Campbell, who is an amazing physical actor. The way he commits to the action and the physical comedy is ingenious. What he does with his facial expressions is amazing. And you gotta keep in mind that it is him on screen for 85% of the film. It's him alone. Only in the third act, other characters enter the cabin as well. And Bruce Campbell kills it. This movie is also gory as hell. I mean, the way he fights off undead Linda, the way blood spills from the attic, and the way he is literally blasted with fountains of blood after taking on his very own demonic hand. That's another great scene. This is the movie where Ash loses his hand because undead Linda bites it. So he has to fight off his very own hand. And the way he does it, I believe it. Have you ever seen the Jim Carrey film where he's unable to lie? There's a scene where Jim Carrey fights himself, and I believe that he did take cues from Ash Williams, aka Bruce Campbell, because that fight is amazing. And of course, it does turn bloody because Ash saws off his very own hand. And near the end of the film, we get the Ash Williams that has become a pop cultural phenomenon. He replaces his hand with a chainsaw. That's right. He's a shotgun-wielding, chainsaw-wielding demon hunter.
Groovy.
And the way he takes on undead Henrietta, I swallow your soul, I swallow your soul. Swallow this.
I'll swallow your soul, I'll swallow your soul, I'll swallow your soul.
Swallow this.
Ash is such an unlikely character for a horror franchise because, as I already told you guys, he's clumsy, he's a bit of a coward, he's a bit of a self-obsessed asshole. I mean, they really developed that concept further in the next installment, Army of Darkness, which is hands down the most hilarious one out of all of these.
Hail to the king, baby.
But Ash is a character that you would normally associate with an 80s action flick or an 80s comedy, not an 80s gore fest horror flick. And that is the beauty of the Evil Dead franchise, is that you have all the horror, all the violence, and all the scares of your typical horror movies, but you throw in this Ash character and everything changes. Everything changes. You have the combination of two things that shouldn't go so well hand in hand, but they do. We have to talk about the stop motion animation, the costume design, the props, the practical effects, because all of that stuff is gold. Is it a little bit dated watching it now? Yes, it is. But you know what? That's part of the charm. Favorite sequence? Well, apart from the swallow your soul thing, probably the bit where Ash is running away from the demonic force, which is basically just a first-person view. We never know what that thing actually looks like, and they did bring that thing back for the TV show Ash vs. Evil Dead, and yet again, they never show us what this evil actually looks like, and I kinda like it that way. And of course, once again, this film ends on a massive cliffhanger, because Ash is sent back in time. He ends up in medieval times where he immediately kills a deadite and then he is worshipped by knights.
Hail he who has come from the skies to deliver us from the terrors of the deadites!
Obviously, it did continue with Army of Darkness. I'm not going to review Army of Darkness this October, but I will eventually talk about it because it's also an amazingly fun film. I just never considered it to be a horror film. This is a straight up fantasy comedy. But Evil Dead 2 has it all. It has the creepy vibes, it has the sets, it has the comedy, it has the fun, it has the carnage. There is no other movie quite like Evil Dead Part 2, and I'd highly recommend it. If you have not seen Evil Dead Part 2, trust me, it's worth your time. You'd be amazed at how much fun it still is to this very day. And I'm gonna give Evil Dead Part 2 the gold medal. It's one of the greats, man. It's one of those movies that has to be on your Halloween playlist because it's just sheer fun and gore and violence and horror and comedy. It combines these elements so flawlessly, and you can clearly tell that everyone involved in front and behind the camera was just having a blast. So Evil Dead Part 2, do you love this movie as much as I do? Let me know in the comment section below. And thank you guys, as always, for watching. If you like what you see here and you want to see more, then just subscribe.